Hello, everyone. Welcome to my talk. I decided to dive into the uh, slightly ambiguous area that everyone keeps asking me every time I get on stage, and that is, what's the best way to do state management in Flutter? And I thought I'd answer it in the best way that I can, or that how to handle state in Flutter. And that's to look at this little diagram here that we've seen pop up fairly frequently, and that is Flutter is about transforming state into a user interface. So Flutter itself is fairly obvious. It's a set of build methods that put things on the screen, but there is an open question as to how to appropriately create and marshal and update state such that you're always displaying the right information on screen. So I'm going to do this the way I always do it, which is with some live coding. So let's break out of my all too short slide deck, slide that off screen. So what we have here is a Flutter application. And what it's going to be is a shop for fonts. And these are a bunch of Google fonts. There's about 900 of them. If you have a look at the Google Font API, how I'm getting at them is using the Google Fonts package. So what I want to do is effectively turn this straight list view into an actual application where people can turn around and have a look at the detail of the font, add it to a shopping cart, and then go from there. Okay. So we've got a running application. The first thing I look at, and I go, I should probably actually use Google Fonts as opposed to the stock standard font at the top of the screen. And let's have a look and see how that's done. So we just turn around and add in some code, press save, and there we go. It turns around and change. So the most important thing I'm getting at here is that the whole reason to use Flutter is that you can make changes and get immediate feedback. But I'm guessing most of you are actual Flutter developers, so that's nothing new under the sun. Let's go a bit further. So what I'm going to do, after putting save, is I'm going to turn around and create a bunch of buttons here that we can turn around and click on and actually add things to a shopping cart. So what we're going to do is we're turning this sample text. It was a stateless widget. It's now a stateful widget, because what we're going to do is turn around and add some state to this state object, and we're going to record, is this font in our cart or not? So how do we do that? Well, obviously, we add a onPressed handler and change the state. So I can wander over here and click on, oh, something's not working. And it's about now that I'd usually throw to the audience and go, what have I done wrong? But given the fact this is a one-way broadcast thing, I'm just going to have to assume you all already knew I was missing my add state call, a set state call. So I turn around and hit save, and suddenly I've got a bunch of tick marks here for things that I've added to the shopping cart. So I'm done, right? I've got things in the shopping cart. What more could I want? Well, okay, let's test something here. Let's add everything to the shopping cart. Actually, let's add this one as well. And let's scroll up. And I'm going to ask a silly question. Now that I've scrolled them off screen, how many of these objects, how many of these fonts that I've added to my shopping cart are still there? Well, let's scroll back down. Oops, I lost a bunch of them. How the heck did that happen? What happened there? And the simple answer is our good old friend, Mr. Garbage Collection, has kicked in and gone, well, those state objects associated with lines in that list view that are no longer on screen can be garbage collected. And it's done a very efficient job of losing the state that those fonts that we added to the shopping cart were in the shopping cart. So a less than useful shopping cart. So we should probably restructure things to actually hold on to the fact that we've added things to a shopping cart. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is start defining an interface. So I'm declaring a type that is effectively a void callback function. I'm converting this sample text widget from a stateful object, well, a stateful widget where we had the sample text remembering if it was added or not. I've turned it back into a stateless widget, and now it has this API effectively that it says, if you tell me what font family I'm displaying, whether I've been added to the shopping cart, and finally give me a way to notify that my add button has been clicked on. Well, now that we've done that, and if I press save, we'll see the all too frequent red screen of doom. But that's okay. This is Flutter. We can code our way out of it. So let's do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is my homepage was previously a stateless widget. I'm now turning it into a stateful widget so that I can again add some state. So now I've pulled the shopping cart up one layer. So it's now, instead of being at the line layer, it's now at effectively the page level. So now we have a list of items in the shopping cart, and we can turn around and properly call the sample text widget with, you're in this font, you're either in the cart or not, and here's a way of turning around and changing that. So if we press save, okay, we're back. We can turn around and add a bunch of fonts to the shopping cart, scroll them off the screen, bring them back down, and they're still there. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to get to about thinking about how to do state in Flutter, is think about where in the tree that state sits and how important it is to hold on to. So if it's something that's important to the user, you hold on to it reasonably tightly, whereas if it's state about a widget that's ephemeral and can be regenerated later, you don't need to push it too far up the tree. So at this point, I've got a font shop, I've got a list of fonts, I can add them to the shopping cart, but what would be nice is that if I could click on the line and go and see a bit more information about that font. So let's turn around and add an on-tap handler to the list tile, and let's start coding in a screen to actually put there. So we're going to have a detail page, and we'll add a navigator to be able to push that page. So let's press save, and let's pick on Advent Pro. Now, again, I've got the red screen of doom, but again, this shouldn't be scary to you. You should have seen this many, many times. And we can just turn around, and the reason we're seeing it is this little throw unimplemented error. We can just turn around and put a scaffold in, press save, and we've got a screen. So here's a really important widget. This is a widget I love a lot. This is a way of immediately throwing up some content that you don't have yet. Frequently used like images I haven't got yet, or some text that I'm going to be getting later. I can just block it in, and I can start getting a feel for the layout of the page. Let's start putting some content. We're going to have a list view. What are we going to put in it? Well, let's turn around and, sorry, my typing is a bit slow at this point. We're going to put in effectively a series of pieces of the font you've chosen, and we're going to put them at different sizes. It's always fun watching my editor actually type for me. I wish I could get this done in real life. Almost there. Headline 4 and a couple of bodies. Body text 1 and 2. And there we go. Press save. And we've got the start of a detail page. And yes, I know all the designers in the audience are currently screaming about the lack of white space between the edge of the phone and the font. The things you see when you step on stage. Okay. That's great. So I've got them different sizes. It'd be nice to have them different weights as well. So let's turn around and do that. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do here is show off something that we added to the language reasonably recently. And quite a few people haven't really dug into it yet. And that's a thing called a collection for. We also have collection if. But what I'm getting at here is I've got a bunch of things that I want to replicate. Hit save. And as you can see, I picked Advent Pro because we've actually got a collection of different weights. Quite a few fonts only have two font weights. Whereas if you have a look here, you can see that there's differences pretty much all the way up the scale. So there's got to be at least 5 or 6 different font weights there, which this is a very nice font. So getting back to it, what I'm doing is I'm iterating through this collection of font weight objects, and for each one generating a line of text. And this is all in the context of a list. This is very useful for when you want to programmatically dump out a bunch of content. Likewise, we've got an if to turn around and conditionally add stuff to a display depending on whether or not a Boolean is set. Okay, this is cool. We have a screen. What next? Yes. Probably should back up one. Okay, so if I go back to this page and if I scroll around, one of the things that's bugging me is this state. One of the problems we have here is that, and this is not so much a correctness issue, this is a performance issue. When I tap on a button, I'm actually firing, if we look deep down here, set state on my home page state, which means that I'm re-rendering effectively the whole page. And it would be nice to actually collapse this down so that we're not damaging the whole screen, but instead restricting the area that has to be repainted. So let's turn around and implement that. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to create a more structure over the state. I'll get back to why it's turned red in a second. So what I'm doing is for every font family that we have, so there's 900 odd fonts, I'm turning around and creating a value notifier over bool for each one of the fonts. Now, of course, because I've changed card items, I didn't rename it, but I changed it from a hash map of strings, from a set of strings to a map of string to bool. This screen is all upset. And the easy way to fix that is just to reload. And there we go, we're back again. We've lost some state, but it was not in a way we could use it. So we can now add things again. And that's all we've changed so far. But the other thing to notice is that we've got this value listener builder, and this ties onto the value notifier, which means that now when I click on this button, I'm only repainting this one line. The rest of the lines on the screen are stable because we're not calling set state on the whole screen. But you know, it would be nicer, as opposed to redrawing the whole screen, to actually push this further down. So let's do that. So as you can see, I've changed the exposed interface for sample text, our list tile builder. Previously, we were taking the font family, whether it was in the list, and a callback. Now I'm actually taking the value notifier itself. And if we look further down, we can now see we're using the value listenable builder, but we're doing it over the trailing icon button. What this means is up here, when we're building our list view, these sample text widgets stay stable, which means now when I press this button, instead of painting the whole line, I'm only repainting the button. These sorts of small wins can be quite useful when you're trying to do animation, 60 frames per second. But again, it's always when you come to optimizations, measure first. Actually figure out if you do have a problem. Just doing these sorts of changes just because it is going to be faster, you may be wasting your time. Okay, let's go a bit further in. So the next thing I'm going to do, as you can see on the font detail page, so let's again go back and pick on our friend Advent Pro. We've got this page, we've got a name, we've got some detail. It'd be nice to have a button down the bottom that says, yes, I want this font. So what we're going to do is we plumb through the value notifier. So this gives us the ability to notify from this page to add this font to the card or not. So let's go ahead and start doing that. And something very bad's about to happen. Let's dig into why. Everything just broke. Well, not really. Everything just disappeared. Previously, actually, I might just take it back to where it was before. As you can see, initially what we had, once it finishes typing, is we had the body had a list view, which meant the list view uh, by nature of being the only thing inside the body was expanded to its full width and height of the viewable area. And what I'm doing, because I'm going to put a button underneath it, is that I'm putting the list view inside of a column, which is our vertical layout widget, which means that suddenly the list view doesn't know how big it should be, so it collapses to 0. And how do we get around that? Well, there's a really easy fix. We turn around and wrap it and expand it. Press save, we've got our thing back. So now that we've got this expanded widget wrapped around everything, we can turn around, add a button bar, press save. Oops. Ah, oops. Ah, dear. I'll just have to reload. I did things in the wrong order. I wound up, one of the things that happens when you're busy rebuilding these things is you wind up with state objects that are not the correct shape. And what happened there was that I was on a page and then added structure to it while it was already loaded, which meant the state objects hadn't changed. So if I go back to Advent Pro, this time you can now see the button because it now actually has the value notifier, whereas previously it didn't. The sorts of things you only get into during live coding. Looking at this, I like the fact that I've got a button. I'd really prefer it to be centerable, will be centered, and that's a reasonably easy fix. We just turn around and give an alignment, hit save, there we go. So now we can add it to the cart and go back here, Advent Pro is added. We can click on that, remove it from the cart, come back to the list. Advent Pro is no longer in the cart. Cool. So that's useful. We're going to have a cart. We've added things to the cart. We take things out of the cart. But there is a problem. I've got this shopping cart, which is somewhere in here. Here it is. So here's my shopping cart. It's buried in the middle of a widget, and I've got really no way to see it in my code. I have to sort of know where it is. It's sort of spread around. It'd be nice to actually centralize it so that I can start doing things with it. So how do you do? One way to do that is to turn around and use provider. Now, I'm not saying provider is the one true way. I'm saying provider is a way of doing this. There are many different ways. We'll get into that in a minute. Now, with provider, I can turn around and start naming the concept. So I've got a shopping cart. It now has some content. We have all of our fonts with value notifiers. So we're pulling the concept up the tree. Now what we need to do also is turn around and provide the shopping cart down the tree. This makes the shopping cart available at various points in the tree that need to get to it. So let's plumb it in. So obviously, previously our homepage was a stateful widget. It's now stateless again because it has no state anymore, and it just consumes the shopping cart. So hopefully we can click on things and things still work, which is good. Now it'd be interesting, I might just hit reload in case I've confused things behind the scenes. What can we actually do with the fact that we have this shopping cart object? Well, oh yeah, let's actually use it. So we're using the value notifier, we're adding items to it appropriately, and for various reasons, mostly me being lazy, I decided I wanted to introduce the concept of having some sort of server, some sort of two-way server that I could turn around and have multiple devices talking to. And I was looking at doing it using WebSockets, but well, I do gRPC during my day job. So I've decided, what the heck, I'll just use gRPC. So let's just reach into my back pocket and pull out something I built earlier, which is a little baby gRPC server. So now I've got a gRPC server, and if I bring up my debug console, we'll be able to see, yes, I've got a gRPC server. Cool. So now I can turn around and start implementing having this talk to a gRPC server. So what I'm going to do is create a channel. The channel gives us the ability to connect, in this instance, insecurely to a server on localhost, which you just saw me bring up. This is going to be the way that we effectively talk to the server by sending RPCs to the client, either adding or removing a font family to the shopping cart. And finally, we turn around and listen to a streaming connection on that gRPC server that tells us what the latest state is. And as much fun as watching me talk to myself, it would be more interesting if I actually brought up another instance so that we can actually see things working together. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to go and bring in the iPhone. Actually, no, I've got the iPhone running. I want an iPad. Bring up a second machine. So I should be able to just hide that. Bring up our debug console. So I've got my iPhone is working fine. iPad is launching the gRPC server. So in theory, if I click on things, and you'll see that's talking. If I look here, I suddenly got a gRPC server that knows what font state is. Okay. So I've got some stuff happening. Good. Now, hopefully, sitting around here somewhere, there should be an iPad. Why did you take so long? No wonder my machine's getting hot. Good old Xcode. Xcode build is done. Should be able to drag my little trusty iPad on screen. And it should come up. So now I can turn around and add things. I can go into Advent Pro, add it to the cart, and if I slide this over, you should be able to see things adding and removing. So, gRPC, it's a cool thing to play with. Let me shut that down. It gives us real-time communication, but there's a slight problem. As you probably see, I don't have error handling, so if I were to, or I don't know, shut down my gRPC server or walk in between the two endpoints, my phone app would die. It would be much better if in between my application and the gRPC server there was some sort of caching layer using, I don't know, SQLite. And as much as I could sit here and build it using SQFlite, there is actually a product that we have that actually implements all of this for you. And if I start typing, you can probably see where I'm going. I'm going to use Cloud Firestore to effectively build this real-time, soft real-time connection between two phones. And just to make my life easier, let's dive ahead and start implementing it. So what am I doing? Previous step was I've imported Cloud Firestore. Now I'm going to turn around and add in the shopping cart, which is now a Firestore collection. So the server is going to be a little bit funny in that I'm going to have a server that has a collection just of the items in my shopping cart. Not exactly something you want to do for multiple users, but we can get into that later. Okay, what else do we need to do? We need to turn around and change the code on when an item is changed. Previously, we were doing this separate RPC calls for adding and removing. Now all we're going to do is set the state of a Firestore document to turn around and say whether a font is in the shopping cart or not. We need to turn around and listen to a stream of events that happen. And when we get notified that a document has changed, we turn around and change our internal state. And finally, we tidy everything up. And then I go and, oh, I don't know, let's really make my laptop hurt and run Android. So Android, fire that up. I can also stop that gRPC server. I don't need it anymore. Take that back to the home screen. Somewhere here, I have an Android. Come here. So debug console, Android. So this is going to take a minute or two to come up. And usually at this point, I would start asking for questions. But given the fact that this is not a live environment, what I'm going to do is go back to my slides and then come back to this when hopefully Android will have, oh, actually no, it's up. So in theory, if I reset that one and reset that one, we should see communication between the two. And in fact, I can go all the way and drag in this guy, and we can see I have a series of fonts here. I've got the Abazi font currently in the collection, and I can click it in, click it out. And in fact, I can even go further and pretending that I'm a server, I can turn around and start making changes to things on the server side, and they turn around and float through. Okay, so that's all my live coding. Let's get back to the deck and talk about what I just showed you. So I showed you there's a bunch of different ways to do state in Flutter. So I had a stateful widget. I think I snuck in a stream builder, a value listenable builder, provider. I didn't sneak in block, RX, Redux. What am I trying to say here? Well, going back to this diagram I showed at the start, where in Flutter, the UI is a function of state. What I'm really getting at is Flutter itself knows how to handle state, knows how to handle showing state as long as you tell us that the state has changed. So it's really on you as a developer to figure out how to set up your state such that you can maintain your state and you can tell us that a certain part of the state has changed and thus needs to be redisplayed. How you do that doesn't really worry Flutter. It's up to you to make sure you always tell us things have changed, which is kind of why I left the set state out initially, to turn around and go, if you don't tell Flutter that something has changed, we won't know to show people that it's changed. So please make sure you always tell us when things change. Over and above that, if you're doing animations and you're not seeing 60 frames per second on your target devices, then break out the tooling and start going, okay, can I reduce the blast radius, if you will, of a change? Initially, when we had a change, I was effectively saying set state at the top level and repainting the whole list. Now in Flutter, this is actually reasonably fast because we're doing pointer comparisons and all that sort of thing. So as long as things are reasonably stable in memory, we'll be quick. But in cases where you've got somewhere deep down the tree that's changing, it can be really advantageous if you limit the blast radius of the change to just that thing, which is why I turn around and show going from repainting the whole list to repainting just a list tile to finally repainting just a button. And these are the sorts of ways that we can turn around and help Flutter be fast, but it's not a hard requirement initially during initial development while you're still figuring out which way is up. Oh yeah, and I should say, whether you use provider, block, Rx, Redux, etc., very much what works for you and your team. We on the Flutter team, we have opinions as to which ones are better, but if you talk to more than one member of the Flutter team, you'll suddenly find out that each of us has a different version as to what's the best thing. I personally really like Value Listener Builder. I really like Stream Builder. Philip, my colleague, really loves Provider, so on and so forth. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just what works for you and the way you model the problem you're trying to solve. And with that, I thank you.